So our topic is transition, and I want to suggest to you that there are actually three transitions that are shaping the oil and gas industry today. Number one is, of course, Paris, the movement towards low carbon. Secondly are the changes in China. And the third is what we might call the shift from the brick era to the shale era. Paris, even before Paris, the climate change agenda was changing the world. 80% of new cars sold in the world today are now sold under some fuel efficiency standards. We've seen the falling costs of renewables and the rising investment in renewables. In 2005, $25 billion was invested worldwide in renewable power. In 2015, that number was $215 billion. Cumulatively over the decade, $1.3 trillion. The Paris, of course, has accelerated things that Eldar talked about, the OGCI, that the carbon price or carbon tax is on the agenda in a global way. That wasn't the case a year ago. It's quite remarkable how climate has become so central in politics. I set out in my last book the quest to write one chapter answering the question, how was it possible that the subject that was just of an interest to a few scientists in the mid-19th century who were worried about another ice age which would obliterate European civilization has become this global political factor? I found I couldn't do it in one chapter. It took 5 chapters to explain this remarkable shift. But we also at IHS see a striking gap between the aspirations around climate change and the reality, and we're now doing modeling work on it, and in particular on the subject that's clear here in Norway but not clear around the world, which if you want to have a competitive, cost-efficient approach to meeting carbon targets, there must be a much bigger role for natural gas. We're trying to quantify that gap right now, and I would say Oslo is the exception, but in most capitals, governments are woefully underestimating the importance of natural gas in meeting climate objectives. But 2 other transitions are also immediately reshaping the energy world. They're highly interrelated and interactive. One is what's happening in China and the change in its economy, and the other is the movement from the brick era to the shale era. The brick era, not so long ago, remember it, high growth and demand, high prices, peak oil, the world was going to run out of oil. But what was going on in that period was a momentous rebalancing of the world economy. During the period 2004-2014, China grew 2.5 times, India doubled in size, and the world became much more integrated in terms of trade and supply chains, something that's under political attack in many countries, including my own right now. Oil was a very central part of that, part of the super cycle in commodities. Between 2004 and 2014, 48% of all the growth in world oil demand occurred in one country, China. There was the only other example I can think of was in the late 19th century when Germany was the center of a super cycle in commodities. It only rarely happens in the world. Well, 2 things brought the brick era in energy to an end. One was, of course, the growth of non-OPEC supply, principally U.S., and the volume growth in U.S. supply that occurred between about 2008 and 2015 was almost exactly the same volume that occurred in the early 1980s when the North Sea and Alaska and Mexico came on. And what history shows is whenever you have a big surge in supply, the price collapses, and that's what happened here.